Alright, okay, sorry for like this weird angle thing. I had to like set stuff up, but I figured it'd be easier this way. So I'm gonna start by like showing you guys the product rule. And since I'm gonna show you another one later, I'm gonna write the different quotient here in the corner just so we can reference it. And you have to know that it's gonna be the limit of h to 0 is f of x plus h minus f of x over h. I had to get like all my colored markers and stuff over here. So the product rule, what I'm pretty sure he's gonna give us to just start out with is gonna be like it itself, like d over d of x drive f of x times g of x. That's gonna be the problem he gives us. And so all we're gonna do is we're gonna basically like combine these two. So you're going to put equals limit of h to 0 I'm so sorry, I hate myself. Limit of h to 0, and this is where it can get difficult, but what you're going to do is you're going to take f of x plus h and g of x plus h. And why you're doing that is because you have f times g, and up here it is x plus h. So you're just plugging that into each of these, but you're still keeping the times there because it's times. And so later on when we do the add and subtract one, you're going to see that's going to be different for that one. But so now, since we have minus f of x to do, we're going to do the same thing, and we're going to do minus f of x times g of x. And all of that is going to be over just h. Now you're not going to plug h into these because there's no f here. If there was f of h there, then you would do that. There's not, so we're just going to keep it as h. So for our next step, what we're going to do, and this is like one part where like you have to memorize something kind of, and what you're going to memorize is that you're going to add in minus f of x plus h g of x plus f of x plus h g of x. And you don't even have to memorize that per se, but this is the two numbers you can add in that are going to make it easier. And so what we're going to do in this step is, because we want to be able to factor later on, we're going to do f of x plus h g of x plus h, and that's just what we took from here before. And we're going to minus f of x plus h g of x from over here, and we're going to add it back in. So we're not really doing anything here. We're just adding 0 in, but we're choosing these two numbers that he showed us in class to just make it easier. So then I'm going to go back into this and do our f of x and g of x, and again that's just coming from this here. And all of that over h still, because we're not changing the bottom at all. We just wanted to add 0 in there to make it able to be factored. And so the next step, you're just factoring. That's all this is. It's complicated because there's like letters, but like it's not, it's simple. So to factor here, for these two, what you have in common is that f of x plus h. So we're going to take that out, and then we're just going to take our g of x plus h and our minus from here g of x. So when you factor all this out, it's going to be over h. It's just going to be the same thing. And since we have the commutative property and all, we can separate these two equations like I did here. I put them in their own parentheses so we could factor them. And so we can just add plus here and do limit h to o. And we're going to do the same thing to this one. We're just going to factor out the g of x this time. That's why we added these numbers in here, so that we could factor it. So we're just going to do that. And this next part you don't have to write out, but I'm going to write it out for you so you can see like where it's coming from. And so all we're doing here is, again, because of the commutative property, we're allowed to take out this f of x plus h as its own thing, and then create this as its own thing. So let me show you. It's going to be limit of h to o of x, or of f, x plus h, and we're going to still times it, but we're just going to separate, so that's limit h to o of g of x plus h minus g of x over h. And I'm going to do the same thing to this side real quick where I just separate it. Then I'm going to explain to you why we did that. So here it's going to be g of x, and then again times, because we don't want to change the fact that these are being times by each other, being multiplied. H to 0 f x plus h minus f of x over h. And so I did that to show you how, because our end goal, you can memorize if you want, but our end goal is going to be f of x times derivative g of x plus g of x derivative f of x. And so how we get there is because if you look here, we have this value times this value plus this value times this value. And if you look at this, h, if you plug in a 0, this is just f of x. So here, this is f of x. And if you look at this one here, and if you look at that, it looks similar, doesn't it? That's because it's the difference quotient. So that's just the derivative is what this is. This is the derivative of g. So we put g of x. And then we have our plus sign here. And again, this limit of g to x is just g of x. And here is the same thing as this, but with an f. So that, again, is a difference quotient derivative, like that. And so if you just try to understand the whole process, you don't really need to memorize the entire proof itself. You just need to know the difference quotient, and you need to know how to plug it in. And from there on, you don't have to use these two numbers, but it's going to be easiest if you do. You don't have to, though. You can just kind of eyeball it, and you can pick whatever you want to put in to be able to factor it. It's just as if you're like factoring with numbers, but it's just a little different because you got a little extra in there. So I'm just going to write up steps for you real quick. So we have your first step. You're just going to plug it in to the difference quotient. Your second is just adding 0, and it's obviously not like 0, 0, but this is just equivalent to 0, which is why we're allowed to do that because of the additive identity. For your third step, you're just factoring it. That's why you put the zeros there, so you can factor it. And your fourth is you're just going to separate out the limits. I don't think he's going to make us write this part down, but you're really just separating it out to show that this is f of x, this is g of x, this is that. And this is your final one. And if you give me a minute, I'm going to go ahead and do the added and subtract one for you because he's going to have that on the test too. And if you like see that one played through, then you'll understand it better.